Let me call this
Good afternoon,
meeting
everyone.
and start by acknowledging that we are on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. Welcome to meeting number 9 of the Standing Committee on Natural Resources. And today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of witnesses and members. For those participating by video conference, we have two witnesses joining us by that means today. Click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Also, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. And for those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on Thursday, September 18, 2025, the committee resumed its study of development of critical minerals in Canada. And let me welcome our witnesses this afternoon on the first panel. We have Richard Dunn, Executive Director, Helium Developers Association of Canada, joining us by Zoom. Welcome. Chris Baker, Co-Chair, Helium Developers Association of Canada, also joining by Zoom. And joining us in person, Pierre Gratton, President and Chief Executive Officer, Mining Association of Canada, and Fotini Kout-Savlis, Vice President, Economic Affairs and Climate Change. And finally, Jeff Gollan, Vice President of Corporate Affairs, Vale Base Metals. Joining him, Spencer Page, Manager, Corporate Affairs, European Union, United Kingdom, and International, Vale Base Metals. Spencer, you get around wherever you are. There you are. So each of you will have 5 minutes or less for your opening remarks. And Mr. Dunn, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, committee members, for the opportunity to address you today. Helium is a critical mineral central to Canada's economic, defence, and digital ambitions. However, the sector is at risk and requires targeted support. Amending the Income Tax Act to designate helium as a mineral resource and make it eligible for standard tax measures would be the single most effective action government can take. The case for supporting Canada's emerging helium sector is strong. As Heather Exner-Pirot noted in her presentation to the committee last week, worldwide demand for helium is growing given its fundamental role in a range of high-tech applications, including semiconductor and fiber optic manufacturing, quantum computing, spaceflight, nuclear energy, and MRIs. Global economic development requires secure and resilient critical mineral supply chains. This is especially true now for helium, where growing Russian helium supplies are saturating the market and driving commodity prices down, while at the same time increasing end-user security of supply concerns. Canada holds the world's 5th largest estimated helium resource. Extracted from deep, relatively unexplored reservoirs in Western Canada, using world-class Canadian drilling expertise, helium development offers significant potential. Saskatchewan's plant alone targets supplying 10% of global demand while generating thousands of jobs and hundreds of millions in annual investment. Manitoba and Alberta have significant helium opportunity as well. However, Canada's helium sector, driven by entrepreneurial small-cap Canadian companies, is struggling. Uncompetitive tax treatment as compared to what is provided other critical minerals in Canada, notably helium's exclusion from standard depreciation schedule and from the flow-through share program, is proving especially impactful in this low-price environment. Exploration and development activity is slow to a crawl. Investor confidence has fallen, and increasingly, helium companies are looking to the U.S. given preferential tax treatment and investor sentiment. Meanwhile, domestic volumes remain too small to justify liquefaction facilities, so final processing of Canadian helium occurs in the U.S., further raising security of supply concerns amid growing U.S. helium demand as well as ongoing trade tensions. Competitive depreciation is a core tool in Canada's economic toolbox to attract investment. However, helium has provided only goodwill depreciation, the weakest depreciation category available. While other critical minerals are typically depreciated against taxes over a 6-year period, helium projects are depreciated over a 40-year period. A major competitive disadvantage and clearly unfair given helium projects typically have an operating life of under 15 years. Helium is also excluded from Canada's proven flow-through share program. Flow-through share financing supports roughly 70% of Canadian mineral exploration and is specifically designed to help junior companies raise the capital needed for early-stage grassroots exploration, precisely the support the helium sector needs. Without access to flow-through shares, risk capital has shunned helium, with the result that Canadian helium companies have struggled to secure the financing needed to advance their opportunities. Consistent with the precedent set in Budget 2023 for lithium from brine, the straightforward solution is to amend the Income Tax Act to include helium as a defined mineral resource. The provinces of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta have all submitted multiple letters of support for the proposed tax measures for helium, recognizing the strategic importance of growing the sector, the modest shared investment between federal and provincial governments, and the substantial value generated for governments and its citizens. In closing, the Kananaskis G7 communique recognized that to strengthen and diversify critical mineral supplies, governments must remove barriers to investment and implement measures that reduce investor risk and attract private capital. Amending the Income Tax Act to designate helium as a mineral resource and make it eligible for standard tax measures will achieve those goals for Canada's helium sector, and in doing so, unlock private investment, stimulate jobs and economic growth, enable domestic liquefaction, increase security of supply, and position the sector as a reliable helium supplier for Canada and its allies. Thank you. We look forward to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn. And now, Mr. Gratton, you have 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today about critical minerals. I also want to begin by recognizing that we are gathered today on the traditional and unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, and to acknowledge the hundreds of Indigenous nations across Canada on whose traditional lands our industry operates and with whom we have strong partnerships. Before getting into specifics on critical minerals, it's important to acknowledge the extraordinary circumstances we find ourselves in as an industry and country since the focus on opportunities related to critical minerals emerged just a few years ago. Around that time, during the first Trump administration in January 2020, the Canada-US Joint Action Plan on Critical Minerals was launched with the goal of, quote, advancing both countries' common interest in strengthening North American critical mineral production needed for defense, aerospace, clean energy, communications, and other key industries. Today, the focus on Canada-US collaboration on critical minerals has largely been displaced by the unprecedented attack on the rules-based order related to trade and to our North American partnership. U.S. tariffs have increased downward pressure on already declining investment, threatening key Canadian sectors. So while we are in a very different place in terms of our economic position, particularly in regard to our relationship with the United States, advancing Canadian critical and all mineral production is now even more of an imperative than it is an opportunity, essential to boosting economic resilience and diversifying Canada's trade. Adding to this urgency is the fact that Chinese influence over the global critical minerals market continues to deepen. Beyond earlier restrictions on gallium and germanium, China now imposes licensing requirements or selective bans on graphite products for battery anodes, antimony, tungsten, tellurium, bismuth, indium, and several rare earth elements. China also maintains roughly 85 to 90% of the world's rare earth refining and separation capacity and dominates the production of rare earth magnets and other downstream components. It also has a large influence on commonly used metals like nickel and cobalt through international investments in Indonesia, the DRC, Zambia, and elsewhere. These actions highlight the strategic risk posed by China's control of downstream processing. For Canada and its allies, this concentration underscores the urgent need to expand mining production and build and diversify refining, recycling, and magnet manufacturing capacity outside China. The good news is that Canada's mining industry is already diversified in terms of trade and global outlook, and ideally positioned to play a central role in recalibrating our economy and providing an anchor for diversified trade relationships to deliver long-term economic resilience and prosperity to our country. I want to underscore here, too, as well, is that while we are facing unprecedented actions by the United States in terms of tariffs on the Canadian economy, the minerals and metals sector has been largely untouched by these. Why? Because the United States, notwithstanding their desire to shore up the manufacturing sector, needs our metals in order to do so. We're also in a situation where we have strong and expected and rising demand for many mineral and metal products, and that demand is expected to increase in the decades to come. We're also at a moment where there is unprecedentedly high public support for mining. In our most recent survey, we saw the largest percentage of Canadians being supportive of the mining sector than we have seen in the last 15 years of surveying Canadians, at 82% of public support. I also saw a recent survey that put mining at the top of a long list of sectors that gave Canadians confidence about the future. The committee motion that launched, so I raise all this because I honestly believe, and I said so before the Vancouver Board of Trade last week when I addressed them, that I think this is mining's moment. I think there is a coalescence of all sorts of factors that really lend themselves to a strong focus on building and growing our mining sector at this point in time. The committee motion that launched the study also rightly referenced Indigenous rights. Central to the ability of our sector to deliver for Canada, and more important than ever, will be the need to maintain responsible mineral production and prioritization of relationships with Indigenous communities. This approach is fundamental to moving forward and cannot and will not be compromised, because we know that any attempt to do so, including rushing or circumventing the constitutional duty to consult, will only set us back. So to deliver for Canada, we need to retool and address declines in key areas and ensure that aspirations related to the mining industry and committed to in the recent election campaign are effectively implemented and delivered at the speed of business. Otherwise, investment and opportunity will go elsewhere. So what do we need to do?
Just going to ask you to finish up, if
Yeah.
you would, Mr. There'll be lots of opportunity with questions.
Sure. There's a few key issues that we want to share with you. First, addressing the clean manufacturing investment tax credit, the copper threshold issue, which many of you may be familiar with because we've been talking about it for 2 years. The ITC needs to be amended because our deposits are polymetallic, and setting a threshold at 90% critical mineral content is too high, and it won't stimulate new investment. You also need to expand the ITC to include other minerals and metals. The previous government focused only on battery metals. We also need to expand it to defense. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gratton. And we're going to go on to Monsieur Gaulin. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. Bon après-midi.
Good afternoon.
Je suis le vice-président des affaires coopératives for
I am Vice President of Corporate Affairs for Vale Base Metals.
a world in transition. At Valley Base Metals, we are stewards of nickel, copper, and cobalt, reserves around the world based in Canada, but in Brazil and Indonesia. Our refineries here in Canada, as well as in the UK and Japan, serve our allies in Asia, in Europe, and yes, even America. Our combination of geology and geography, grounded and centered here in Canada, allows us to deliver a reliable and responsible supply of minerals through today's global volatility to produce the products of the future. Artificial intelligence and data centers, robotics and defense systems, energy and telecommunications infrastructure. Critical minerals are foundational to Canada's economic resilience, our national security, and our global competitiveness. And you can count on us to keep Canada secure, sovereign, and sustainable. In Canada, we employ more than 7,000 Canadians to explore, mine, and refine critical minerals in Manitoba, Ontario, and Newfoundland and Labrador. We operate the only fully integrated mining complex in all of North America. Our mineral abundance and our rich heritage in developing them responsibly makes Vale Base Metals a Canadian champion, a global connector in a fractured world. We are Canadian by choice. Demand for critical minerals is growing exponentially in a world where price and supply volatility are now the norm. The International Energy Agency reports that demand for key minerals continues to surge. Supply for refined materials highly concentrated in China, which is suppressing prices for minerals such as lithium, graphite, and nickel. Projects face regulatory uncertainty. Trade agreements are under attack, and the threat of export restrictions is only on the rise. In short, critical minerals are being weaponized. And in response, Canada can be a secure global supplier. Canada's presidency of the G7 gives it a unique opportunity to expand markets such as Germany, as well as other EU countries, who today are reliant on minerals that originate in Russia and are refined in China. But this is not simply a matter of finding a match between Canadian supply and global demand. I have been to London, Washington, Dubai, Brussels, Berlin to advocate for more Canadian access to those markets. But supply chains abroad are not going to change easily or quickly without change here at home. Building new supply relationships takes time, coordination, and the sharpening of our competitiveness to make Canadian minerals more attractive to foreign markets. Therefore, I propose 4 recommendations for the committee's consideration. Number 1, position Canada as a supplier of choice for NATO. Canada should aggressively pursue NATO defense and adjacent infrastructure spending in exchange for preferential, long-term, secure and reliable access to critical minerals at a premium. Canada has applied to join the Security Action for Europe, the SAFE program, which is basically the EU's defense procurement club. If accepted, Canada will join the UK as the only non-EU members in the club and the club's leading critical minerals producer. Canada could leverage such a membership by integrating Canadian minerals into SAFE's procurement. This would give Canada a competitive advantage to provide the EU with critical minerals, both for defense-related procurements and strategic economic infrastructure such as LNG, pipelines, data centers, and AI. Number 2, increase the availability of capital. Canada should expand the eligibility criteria of the investment tax credits to make eligible mine development expenses to spur the investments that increase our mineral output fast. Canada should also work with G7 credit institutions such as the UK Export Finance to encourage the financing and use of Canadian critical minerals in our allies' supply chains. And Canadian pension funds should be encouraged to invest more into Canadian natural resources, particularly critical minerals. Number 3, elevate global standards. Canada should lead through the G7 Critical Minerals Production Alliance the implementation and enforcement of traceability standards. Canada should also get our allies to revisit their rules of origin to reflect the real risks of the minerals in their supply chains. 4, secure a global workforce. Now, finally, Canada should compete for top global mining talent, for we are more likely to run out of miners than we are to run out of minerals. Now, naturally, we should develop a domestic workforce as best we can. But as a country, we should also compete to recruit and retain the best in the world, to turn the world's best miners into Canadians by choice. Priority review and recognition should be made for work visas and immigration applications within the critical minerals industry to support Canada rapidly becoming a more secure, sovereign, and sustainable global supplier of choice. Becoming more competitive will speed our access to market. That is essential for Canada's prosperity, resilience, and national security. Critical minerals are not just valuable rocks. They are the bedrock of Canada's industrial, trade, and defense strategies, now and for a generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gowlin. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. And thank you all for your presentations, for your recommendations, which I know the committee will consider carefully. So we're going to go on to our first round of questions and comments, and we're going to start with Mrs. Stubbs for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here. Of course, as always, there's too many questions and answers and too little time. Richard Dunn, you, as have actually all of the witnesses reinforced and mentioned in some degree or another, warned about Russia's growing helium supply. And of course, helium is one of Canada's critical minerals. I wonder if you believe that the current federal government policy framework has done enough to ensure that Canada's allies are not dependent on authoritarian regimes for a critical mineral that is so essential to semiconductors, to MRIs, and to other defense applications, given the inextricable link between resource, economic, and national security and sovereignty in Canada.
Well, thank you for your question there, MP Stubb. Certainly, we think that much more needs to be done. As mentioned, in order to get the playing field level, we strongly recommend providing standard tax measures to helium in Canada to develop the resource. And this, as I mentioned, is especially important in a time of low price environment when we see Russian helium saturating the market. But it's not just Canada that sees or Canadian producers that see this imperative. It's our partners, it's our allies in Asia, for example. We're seeing where Japanese companies are getting very concerned about increasing reliance on Russian helium and the partnership that Russia has with China, potential for weaponization. And why? Whether it's Japan or Taiwan or Korea, significant helium use in semiconductor production. And Japan, for example, has listed helium as a critical material for their semiconductor supply chain. Without helium, you don't make semiconductors. And of course, the implications there are enormous with respect to economies, the digital side, but also defense applications as well. So absolutely, we are seeing increased Russian influence, low prices, concerns around security of supply. To counter that, to build up a resilient Canadian supply chain in helium, we believe that the recommended tax measures, the fair tax parity, if you will, be provided to helium. And from there, a strong domestic supplier, but also able to supply our allies' needs, whether it's in Japan, EU, etc.
And this would be Canada actually efficiently developing and be able to export its helium resources, which certainly provides support to our allies in Europe and to countries like Japan and Taiwan, which counterbalance authoritarian imperialist hostile regimes in both of those regions. I wonder if you also have a comment to make on the fact that all liquefaction facilities are currently based in the United States. Do you think that poses a strategic vulnerability for Canada?
Absolutely. Canadian production of helium is somewhat stalled out at this point, given investor sentiment and inability of companies to raise at-risk capital. And with that, with the limited amount of production that Canadian helium producers are at, really, and helium is produced as a gas, and it's at local facilities, and it's finished up as a liquefaction for use around the world for transport, etc. Now, the limited scale of Canadian helium production at this point doesn't justify these sort of central liquefaction facilities. There's facilities in the U.S., down in Montana, in Colorado, etc., that all Canadian gas is sent to for liquefaction. And given, A, this increases the operating cost, but B, it really, once the gas is in the U.S., the helium gas is in the U.S. and is then for liquefaction purposes. Now it's in the U.S. and it's subject to restrictions in terms of coming back to Canada for Canada's helium needs. And certainly, is this a possibility? Well, with the U.S., with the trade tensions we've seen, absolutely. But also, helium production is helium consumption in the U.S. is dramatically increasing as a result of the repatriation of the chips shops, and also the dramatically increased space flight. So what we see is that where the U.S. likely is to become a net importer of helium within the next 3 to 4 years, then once Canadian helium is in the U.S. for liquefaction, there's some risk that it will actually be able to come back to Canada for our Canadian needs.
Oh, I only have 30 seconds, so then I was going to invite Pierre and Jeff to comment on, if they can quickly, the comparable differences between the amount of time and the complications of permitting processes that it takes to get a mine from concept to production here in Canada, importantly juxtaposed against Canada's biggest mining competitors around the world. If you have time, we may have another chance.
We'll come back to that.
Okay.
Mr. Millette will have the floor next for the CPC, and I'm sure he'll be happy to ask that question or have folks respond. So we're on to Mr. Gay at 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Gaulin, the first question is to you. By the way, thank you very much for employing 7,000 Canadians. You are a global corporation. So when you're deploying capital within Vale, what would be the number one, number two things that would make Vale's board of director or executive team deploy more capital in Canada, either for mining, if you don't mind answering A and B, A for mining, B for refining and processing? I would be really interested.
Thank you for the question. So we operate 7 mines in Canada and 3 refineries, including North America's only cobalt refinery. The opportunity for Canada is that we are safe, secure, rule of law jurisdiction. That's great. We have labor peace, we have infrastructure, we have talent. But as a mature industry, and our assets have been around, some of them in excess of 100 years, the cost of doing business is quite high. So we have to look at what is our rate of return here versus elsewhere. 2, what is the time to get a project complete, not only permitted, but complete and to market? And 3rd is the geopolitics of once it's built, will you be able to keep it and serve markets? I think there are elements of that where Canada could increase its competitiveness, but there are also elements of that where Canada is a global leader and globally competitive today.
Thank you very much. My next question, Monsieur Gratton. Monsieur Gratton, vous représentez...
Mr. Gratton, you represent the industry in general. And one of the things that we're trying to determine here in this committee, in this study, is what type of infrastructure your constituents actually need in order to have access to external markets. Are there similar requests coming from your members in terms of infrastructure needs? Yes and no is the answer. Yes, insofar as it depends on a given region or depends on the company, they have different needs. For companies operating in the north of Canada, they need lots of different types of infrastructure. Energy transmission needs, they need ports, they need roads. And if we look at what's happening in Vancouver, they need a much bigger port infrastructure system. So it really does vary from one region to another, depending on where the companies are situated and the type of products that they produce. For example, if you're a gold company, then it's easier to transport your goods than if you're a nickel company, or even more if you're dealing with coal or iron. So it really does depend. But something is quite certain. to operate in certain corners of Canada and to open up to certain parts of Canada is going to take infrastructure and investment. For example, in the northwest of British Columbia, there are proposals to expand the transmission system, and that could open up important copper projects. And in the rest of Canada, there's similar situations, but it really does depend. Now, what would it take? Because when we talk to each mining company, depending on where they're located, as you've said, there will be different needs that are mentioned. But rather than doing this on a case-by-case basis, how can we proceed as a government in order to have requests that would serve several mines, several types of mining activities at the same time, whether it's in the Northwest or in Saskatchewan or Quebec in the Saguenay region or the Labrador Trough? Because there's different mining companies there, and it doesn't seem that they're coming to see us as a group together to ask for infrastructure. Each type of mining has their specific needs, but do you have suggestions to see how we could group this more together so that it's really worthwhile for Canada to invest in a significant number of mines? Now, I've mentioned certain regions where there's a concentration of mines. Those were examples that I was giving, such as the Labrador Trough that you mentioned, the northwest of British Columbia, or Nunavut. There's a proposal for the Grays Bay Port and Road. That's another example. We always talk about the Ring of Fire. That's another example where they need a great deal. So the idea of your government, the first and last mile, yes, that is a good idea. And we hope that there's going to be news coming out on the 4th of November on that. That's an example where companies can actually come before the government with specific projects to meet their infrastructure needs.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we are on to Monsieur Simard. 6 minutes.
Merci.
6 minutes for Mr. Simard. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Gratton, listening to your presentation, you've said that there is a favorable economic situation for the mining sector. And I understand that because of the trade conflicts that we have with the U.S. and the needed energy transformation underway. But how should we take this favorable economic situation and turn it into mining projects? My friend Claude has talked about this. There is infrastructure needs, and perhaps this can be partly covered by the government, but not entirely. I have a question. We've discussed this. We've talked about the Northern Corridor project to link Ontario to a port up in Saguenay, in Deepwater Port. So we have to see how we can actually fund that type of infrastructure project. Perhaps there can be government participation, but I wonder whether, based on your knowledge, there is this type of infrastructure project where users pay for the project in the sector, and perhaps there's different types of financial engineering involved. The committee is trying to establish and determine how we can be a bit more agile when it comes to infrastructure, and how can we call on different partners, whether the state or Indigenous communities or companies. So I'd like to hear from you on that. It's good to have this favorable economic situation, but then we have to actually harness this potential. I'd like to hear from you on that. There's a nice example of this in Alaska. I'll take this as an example, the Red Dog mine. It's a zinc mine from the Teck Resources company. It's a Canadian company. I think they started production 30 years ago. And at the outset, around the mine, there was no infrastructure at all. The government back then, with their infrastructure bank, actually built a port and a road. to be able to serve this mine correctly. And the mine actually paid to have access to these two forms of infrastructure. This really paid dividends, if you like, 30 years later, and it allowed the company to move ahead with the mining project. There's another example I can cite where there were several critical minerals projects in Nunavut that are similar. Also involving zinc and copper mining projects. We're familiar with these projects. They've existed for 60, 70 years now, and they're still there. Still not really built because there's a lack of infrastructure, but there's several where if they had a port and a road and the same idea as the one that was developed by Alaska 30 years ago, they would be able to actually serve these projects in Nunavut. So that's where Grays Bay Port and Road comes in as a project, which could allow us to move forward with several mining projects. So that's basically what it takes. There needs to be a zone or a region where there's several projects underway at the same time. There's potential for several clients, as we've seen in the northwest of British Columbia or in the Labrador Trough. And also, as we've seen, for example, in Val d'Or, there's copper and gold mine. So perhaps here there's several examples of mining projects where, with a bit more infrastructure, we could really turn around the economics of these projects. Thank you. I think I've still got some time, haven't I, Chair? Thank you very much. I appreciate this critical threshold for projects around infrastructure, and I think we'll be able to bring that out in the committee. Now, Mr. Gaulin, we've already had discussions together in the past, and if I remember correctly, we've already had a discussion about this famous question of ITCs for clean manufacturing. Clean tech manufacturing, and this covers the supply chain being extended to cover critical minerals. So could you explain to the committee why it would be useful to extend this investment tax credit for clean tech manufacturing? Thank you for that question. The challenge is a simple one. With the investment tax credits, at the moment I can buy a truck or a pickup, something like that, and I get an ITC of 30%. But when it comes to underground infrastructure such as lighting, electricity, infrastructure to keep the mine safe, none of these costs are actually eligible costs, and so they cannot receive the tax credit. If we want to expand the production of critical minerals, and if we want to find new markets for Canadian products, and if we want to expedite the development of clean tech to serve the energy transformation, then it's absolutely essential to increase the growth of production of Canadian critical minerals. And as far as I'm concerned, the fastest way to do this, the simplest way to do this, so that private companies decide to put capital into projects, is by actually increasing or changing this particular investment tax credit. I know I don't have any time anymore, Chair. I'd just like to ask Mr. Gaulin if he'd be able, in writing, to provide us with an explanation of this answer that he's just given to us so that it can actually appear in the analyst's report.
Something I was going to say. You beat me to it, but thank you all for that first round of questions and comments. We're now on to our second round. We're going to start with Monsieur Mallette, 5 minutes.
Thank you. Monsieur Gratton.
Mr. Gratton.
Canada arguably possesses one of the world's most abundant chests of resources, yet we seem to fall behind from many countries when it comes to our mining operation. To your experience, why is this the case?
So, I'll give you a history lesson. I think successive provincial and federal governments spent the last several decades taking our sector for granted and forgetting just how essential we are to this country. And it's in the last 5 years that everyone has woken up. Governments of all stripes across the country have woken up and said, oh, what just happened here? We need more mining. And that's welcome. That's where I sort of say that I think it's mining's moment. I think the not just Canada, but the world has woken up to the fact that we actually need the things that make the things that we rely on for our daily lives. I do think it was, I mean, mining has been such a central industry for this country for so long that you know, it's not to necessarily be critical. I can see how maybe governments took us for granted. We were very big and we kept growing, and then we started to slow down and people weren't really noticing. But now we are, and I think things are starting to turn around. We just have to look at the gold sector, which has gone from 5th to 4th spot overall worldwide in the last few years. We've increased our production of gold at a time when it's a really good time to be producing gold by 31%. And we've got more mines coming on stream. So our production is going to increase this year and next. We can do the same for copper. We can do the same for nickel. We can do the same for all of the critical minerals that we need with the same focus and discipline. Gold has had the advantage of having prices that have attracted a lot of exploration and development. With the right tax incentives, like my colleague just mentioned, for development costs underground, we can increase our production of nickel and other critical minerals in the very short to medium term. So we can do this. We just need to now turn our attention to what's required.
Monsieur Gaulin, you're an international company. What has your company's experience been with the mining approval process in Canada compared to other jurisdictions you operate in?
As mentioned, we are a mature miner in Canada. I think we've recently brought on the Voisey's Bay underground expansion to our surface mining there, but many of our mines are deep underground and have been for quite some time. The mining approval process in other jurisdictions can sometimes move faster, but not always with the same degree of certainty that when you get your permit, that you will actually get to build. So we do operate in other jurisdictions such as Brazil and Indonesia, where you may be promised your permit in time, but then your ability to build, to have access to the infrastructure and to get to market may be questioned. I think what we're seeing around the world, certainly in Canada, but it's a contagion around the world, is to accelerate mine permitting responsibly around the world. The EU has done that. The United States is doing that at rapid pace, and that is something that we should keep our minds and our attention on, because just as 10 years ago, the United States was the #1 customer for oil and gas for Canada, it became our #1 competitor. Mining faces the same existential threat from the United States. So I would applaud any motions that accelerate mine permitting in Canada, because we are going to need more minerals for all of the above. But that is something that shouldn't be restricted just a few projects. That should be for all responsible projects.
It's time for a quick
Can I just add something here? Is that, may I?
Go ahead. Yes.
There's a saying in the industry that I heard a long time ago that is worth mentioning here. Canada is often said within our sector is to be one of the best places to operate a mine, one of the worst places to develop it. And we need to change the second part And I think there are steps that we're seeing across the country to do just that. We don't have to become the best or the fastest in the world because we've already got that first one down, as Jeff mentioned. But we have to get better at that second half of the equation.
Thank you, Mr. Gratton. So we're going to go on to Mr. Hogan for 5 minutes and then Monsieur Simard for 2.5.
So thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all of our witnesses for being here. I want to talk about the overall market environment for critical minerals, because I think we can all absolutely agree there's a place for robust industrial policy, smart interventions by Canada and the provinces. But of course, we also want a free market with supply and demand and price signals. And so there's a couple of problems that come to mind for me. The first problem is domestically. Mr. Dunn, you identified unequal treatment of critical minerals. And, second, I think we have an international challenge, and that's really two. First, it's a race, as you mentioned, Mr. Gaulin. And second, and it's been touched by many witnesses, not every nation wants a free market. And so there are interventions in that otherwise operating free market. So I'll get to that if that time allows. But Mr. Dunn, I was pretty compelled on first exposure that helium should be treated like other critical minerals from a flow-through and ITC perspective. I wanted to maybe give you the chance to elaborate on that and inform the committee on if there were other areas where treatment was uneven, or if there's areas we should take extra care to make sure we're not distorting the market and creating other unevenness throughout.
Thank you, MP Hogan. Well, definitely the uncompetitive tax treatment that helium receives is a real problem. Not having access to the standard tools, is certainly Canada recognizes that depreciation is a big deal in terms of attracting investment. And you can see this through Canada's accelerated investment initiative that focuses on competitive depreciation rates. As well, flow-through shares are responsible for 70% of financing for nascent exploration. So these are key tools that Canada has in its economic toolbox that currently helium doesn't have access to. So with that, it could go further, critical mineral exploration tax credits, ITCs, but, at this point, just getting tax parity, getting the basic tax treatment right is important to get the industry on its level playing field. To carry on with your question around, what would be the next step? Once we've established the industry production, getting the company solid, the next step, as in answer to MP Stubbs' question around the reliance on U.S. liquefaction, would then be get the production up in Canada. Now let's look at establishing that infrastructure in Canada, the liquefaction infrastructure in Canada. From there, we can reliably meet Canada's needs, but we can start to export liquid helium to our allies. So to answer your question, the next step would be to attack measures that would incent liquefaction once we get tax parity for the producers.
And so your comments about allies leads really naturally into that second question. Not every government wants that free market. We've got a lot of geopolitical rivals who are happy to see prices low if it serves their interests by depressing investment in these critical minerals across the Western world. So how do we address that? How do we address that in a minimally impairing sense to make sure that we still have a free market that is sending price signals? Because I'll say one of my concerns is, yes, absolutely. Let's talk about price floors. Let's talk about the various tools that are available to us, purchases by governments to stockpile. But how do we make sure that we're not making an overall uneconomic decision? I want to combat their uneconomic decisions. I don't want to create our own uneconomic decisions. And maybe, Mr. Gaulin, you're a natural launching point for that one.
Well, we can't out-China China.
Yeah.
Simple. We don't have the wallets to do that. But when the United States government invests $400 million into one company for equity, for offtake, for price floors, you don't live in Adam Smith land anymore. You don't. The invisible hand is visible. And critical minerals, select of them are, the market is not transparent. The market is not efficient. And so the ability to rely, and I'm a child of free trade. I would love to have seen that continue. But we don't live in a world where that is necessarily the global market for these types of commodities. I do think some of these measures have to be time-bound to provide us and Canada with a first-mover advantage. As I outlined in my remarks, I think that we can be the provider of choice to places like NATO, G7, and the like, because we are established, because we can get them out of the ground faster, and because we can therefore sustain an incumbent position with some of these customers. I'll give you an example. We sell 70% of our nickel to the United States. That is a good relationship and has been since before World War II. We sell less than one shipment a year to Germany. Germany is, if you think Germany is over-reliant on Russia for natural gas, wait till you see what it does for nickel in its military. 99% of its nickel comes from Russia. These are not conditions that will just be magically changed overnight entirely at free market. There will need to be some industrial intervention as we are in this period of realignment and transition.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you both. Mr. Simard, 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. In your opening statement, Mr. Gaulin, you made 4 recommendations, and you talked about the defence and strategic aspect, the SAFE programme, 150 billion euros for defence projects, including critical minerals. And here in the committee, on some occasions, we've heard the fact that perhaps NATO would like to have floor prices for certain critical minerals so that perhaps mining projects could get going. But we've often heard about initiatives. I've been here since 2019. We've talked about lots of different initiatives. I haven't seen any of them seeing the light of day, so I remain cautious. But I'd like to hear more about this economic situation where we've got defence needs, national security needs, all of this converging and coming together. And are there opportunities there for the mining industry, and how could Canada act to respond to the needs of certain European partners? I'd like to hear from you on that. Well, I am more at ease to answer that question in English, if you don't mind. No problem at all there.
That's been quite exciting about the critical minerals sector is that in addition to the base types of technologies that we provide, there are 2 massive future industries to support. Clean energy, which may or may not include EVs, but certainly we're talking about renewable energy, mobile batteries, etc. At the same time, at least in our company, but in many other critical minerals, they have long gone into defense applications, both of which we see as growth industries over the next 20, 30, 40 years. It's just a matter of what is your percentage of growth. And so I think the opportunity for us is not to pick one or the other, but absolutely produce more minerals for all applications around the world. Our historic trading relationship for our critical minerals, and we produce mostly nickel, but also copper and cobalt. Some days we're a gold miner who happens to pull out nickel out of the ground. But these have been essential for the American industry. I'll give you a perspective. We have 5 mines in the city of Sudbury, 5 nickel mines in the city of Sudbury, and we invite any and all the committee to come visit. There is 1 in the entire United States, and it does not have a refinery. It has to send that to Canada to be refined. So this has been a good bilateral relationship for a number of years. Our opportunity is not only to supply the world's biggest market, but to add new markets such as the European Union.
Thank you.
Is immense.
Thank you. We're going to go on to Mrs. Stubbs for 5 and end up with Mr. Danko for 5, wrapping up the second round of questioning. Mrs. Stubbs.
Thank you, Chair. Monsieur Gratton, you have said, and of course we agree with you, quote, Canada must foster a more efficient investment and regulatory environment, and that for the federal one, that involves an impact assessment and environmental assessment, and that takes several years. You've also warned that, as you have again here today, quote, the timelines that it takes to get mines through both federal and provincial processes present a real risk to Canada's ability to take advantage of this opportunity. I noted too the comment earlier that Mr. Golan made about the risk in operations in places like Indonesia or Brazil, where you may get an approval yanked after you've got it. I would just alert for the committee that that is, of course, precisely the concern with C5, because allowable in C5, a problem I tried to fix, is the ability for the federal government to take a project off of the national list even once it has made it. So there still remains great uncertainty for junior explorers and producers in Canada and for major mature mining operators such as the ones that your organization represents. Of course, it is fact that in 2024, a survey of mining executives found no Canadian jurisdictions among the top 5 globally for mining investment, and Canada does have the second slowest approval times in the OECD. So that goes to your point about needing to improve the way in which Canada develop mines. So these facts, as they are, including the fact that it takes 23% longer than Australia and 38% longer than the United States to get a mine approved and operating in Canada. I wonder if, Pierre and Jeff, if you have comments in terms of, the policy levers that do tip Canada over into an uncompetitive position, just given the kinds of challenges there are for our amazing Canadian miners in terms of geography, geology, access to land, climate, uncertainty in policy, some of these things that tip the scale against some of our international competitors. And maybe you want to give some best practices among international competitors that that Canada could adopt to fix this issue in terms of developing mines in Canada.
Yeah, I don't want to. My intention is not to dispute what you've said, but just to put some of it in context. There are some parts of the United States where no one would bother trying to build a mine because you'd never get them approved. And there are some states in the United States where, yeah, it's probably more efficient than here. And within Canada, there are some provinces that are more efficient than others. And so trying to say that it takes X amount of time to build a project in Canada, well, it depends where. Saskatchewan can be quite quick. Quebec can sometimes be quicker. BC can be longer. So it really varies.
And to that end, maybe you have some comments on the complications from overlapping jurisdictions and duplication, where perhaps there could be a permanent federal policy solution to that issue.
For sure. And so to turn to that point, I think since the Supreme Court opinion was provided on the Impact Assessment Act, we have started to see some meaningful change in how the agency is approaching its work. Do they need to go do more? Yes. But what we are seeing now is a more of a concerted effort, and we see it with the latest lithium project in Quebec, where they have worked out an agreement with the Cree and with Quebec that they are truly focusing on their own areas of federal jurisdiction and leaving the rest alone, which is the first clear example that we've seen, and it's the most recent one to come out of the agency in terms of a tailored impact guidelines. So we saw that as a very, very positive step. They've recently published a draft collaboration agreement with New Brunswick. It's a small mining jurisdiction, but nevertheless, that's also a positive step. The more cooperation there is, we're hearing they're getting close with Saskatchewan. That would be potentially a game changer. And we're noticing, like, a key issue for us has always been, like, when the agency asks proponents to do multi-year studies of critters or something, when you know the answer in advance, like, what the regulatory instrument is going to be to mitigate any potential impact on those critters. So do you really need to study for 3 years that when you know what the answer is? And of course that means 3 years of study. So how do you possibly get a project through in 3 years when 3 years alone is going to be studying this one species? So it's rethinking what they asked for and rethinking how they approach impact assessment that has been really important, and we are starting to see some real change.
Thank you. And wrapping up this round.
Chair, can I just say maybe thank you, Mr. Curtin, and maybe Mr. Golan would be able to provide some written response just in terms of international jurisdictional comparisons where his company operates.
A bit, Mr. Gunn, 30 seconds.
Oh,
Now is the time to build big in Canada, and the rules are set up to build small. And the risk to major or mega capital investments would favor small incremental investments. So, whether particularly clearing up the regulatory responsibilities between the feds and the provinces would be extremely helpful to streamline, and making sure that it's in the hands of mining policymakers, not the environmental departments.
Okay, Mr. Danko for 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is mainly for Ms. Koutslavis. I hope I'm saying your name right, because I want to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about climate change and the Canadian mining sector. Of course, many Canadians, especially young Canadians, consider climate change to be an existential threat to their future livelihood. And unfortunately, many conservatives deny the existence of climate change altogether. Of course, many mining projects are in the north, where the impacts of climate change are the most profound and can't be conveniently ignored. So 2 questions on this topic. The first is, what progress in the mining industry have we seen on carbon reduction, climate change initiatives, environmental standards? And also, my second question would be on how does that climate change initiative, environmental standards, contribute to Canada's overall global competitiveness? Thank you.
Chair, and to the member for the question. MAC supports Canada's net zero goals and the role that carbon pricing plays in driving that transition. Carbon price has encouraged efficiency, innovation, investment in cleaner technologies across our sector. But as it rises to $170 per ton by 2030, we need to also carefully balance climate ambition with competitiveness. Mining and processing are globally traded industries that can pass on costs, that can't pass on costs. So maintaining strong output-based pricing, credit flexibility, and reinvesting revenues into low-carbon innovation is essential. To answer your question a little bit more precisely, in terms of global standards, Canada is a leader when it comes to low-carbon mining. Our emissions intensity is among the best in the world, and the trend is moving in the right direction. So between 2014 and 2023, the sector's greenhouse gas intensity fell by about 3% per year. We've also cut sulfur dioxide emissions per facility, while other measures like particulates and energy intensity are more mixed but still improving. So the overall picture is this. Canada is widely recognized internationally as a high-performing, low-carbon jurisdiction, and that gives us a real edge because customers and supply chains are increasingly looking not just what minerals they buy, but how they are produced. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And just further to that focus on environmental standards and climate change as part of Canada's global competitiveness as a specific strategy in the industry. When consumers are looking to purchase a product or they're looking at the components of the product, how are those specific components, those minerals, traced back to Canadian manufacturers? And is that a value add that consumers are actually looking for?
Traceability is a challenge in mining. Unlike forestry, where you can go to Home Depot and see if it's FSC certified or one of the other standards in forestry. It's much harder to do that with mining, but there is work underway. We're actually involved in a pilot with the BC government using our Towards Sustainable Mining program standard to create a passport that sends information to the customer about the TSM ratings that the product has over to the over to the, say, to the smelter or the refinery in another jurisdiction, or even further downstream. So, but it's still early days, but we are pioneering it. The UN is also the UNEP, I think, is also involved with us, and it's the first pilot project of its kind to develop a traceability system.
You and just a follow-up question: if there's any specific climate initiatives that you would like to highlight that you see as best practices in the industry.
Do you want to take it?
You can also.
There's I mean, there's many things that the. I'll give one example of something we'd like to see that hasn't been done, unfortunately, which is supporting investments in trolley assist technology. It is something that ECCC was interested in as part of the which was under the clean fuel regulations, but then it got deferred. They didn't approve it in time, and they deferred it to the next 5-year review, which is now approaching. But basically, there are examples in Canada. There's the Copper Mountain Mine in British Columbia, where you use power to go up, but you charge on the way down, and so it's no, sorry, it's the other way around. I'm forgetting. Anyway, yeah, but basically, because you haven't completely removed the use of power from the grid to power your mine, or you haven't completely removed diesel from your trucks, but you're using trolley assist to go up.
We would,
so that's something that we thought should be included in the clean fuel standard. It wasn't because it wasn't total removal of diesel.
All right.
But it cuts it in half.
So we'd and I'd make this general comment that if any of you would like to present briefs to the committee, we would welcome that. And as our time closes down on this first panel, just to thank you on behalf of my colleagues for your testimony, for being with us today. If Mr. Gratton, if I can quote you, there were many good mining moments in the last hour. So thanks so much. Calling us back to order. And let me start with a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Also, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. And for those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. And a reminder, as always, all comments should be addressed through the chair. I'd like to give a warm welcome to our witnesses on the second panel. We have Michael Goulot, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Vice President, Policy Business Council of Manitoba. Oh, sorry, of Canada. That's our next guest is from Manitoba. I'm from Manitoba. I've got Manitoba on the brain. I can't help it. Business Council of Canada. And Peter Fleming, Minister of Natural Resources, Regional Executive Officer, Northwest Métis Council, Manitoba Métis Federation, National Government of the Red River Métis. You will each have 5 minutes or less for your opening remarks, and I'm going to start with Mr. Goulot. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
All right, good afternoon. It's a privilege to be here. My name is Michael Goulot. I'm the Vice President of Policy at the Business Council of Canada. The Business Council of Canada is composed of 170 chief executives and entrepreneurs of Canada's leading enterprises. Our member companies directly and indirectly support more than 6 million jobs across the country and hundreds of thousands of small businesses. Founded in 1976, our mandate is to make Canada the best country in the world in which to live, work, invest, and grow. As you know, Canada is facing a lot of headwinds. Canadians are struggling with the high cost of living, productivity is down, and business investments are amongst their lowest in decades. Once a top 5 supplier of many natural resources, Canada has lost market share. New energy exports have remained flat, and the share of Canadian exports to emerging economies is amongst the lowest of the G7 countries. Canada is no longer a top 5 producer of important minerals like nickel, cobalt, graphite, and copper. At the same time, we know this is a world poised for growth. Rising populations and the rapid growth of the global middle class are creating strong demands for energy and resources, while national security and clean energy applications are driving global demand for critical minerals. Canada has a lot to offer, and we know that our allies and trading partners are looking for stable suppliers. But being rich in resources is one thing, and how we capture market share is another, and we need structural changes to translate our trade ambitions into action. This is why the Council wrote the recent report, Selling to Our Strengths, which is a roadmap for leveraging Canada's resources at a time of global uncertainty. Our report calls for a whole-of-government approach to unlock Canada's immense potential and to position the country as a reliable supplier of energy, food, and critical minerals. And I'd just like to take some time and draw your attention to some of the main arguments in our report. Our view is that Canada's resources should be used to advance the country's national and economic interests. In an era where the weaponization of resources and supply chains is becoming more commonplace, Canada should seize the moment to grow its global market share by trading more with its allies who value responsible resource development. Our policy efforts then should focus on 2 outcomes. 1, creating strong and resilient supply chains across North America, and 2, expanding Canada's global reach with its allies. Energy security is now a top priority for Canada, the US, and Mexico, and we argue that Canada should champion an energy alliance with the US and Mexico that advances shared interests with respect to energy and mineral security. This can cover information sharing about security risks, cooperation on policies to unlock higher levels of production, and export policies designed to meet the needs of our allies. Canada has top 10 reserve status for many minerals and is a leading producer of potash, aluminum, iron ore, copper, and indium. We're the biggest source of imports to the U.S. for many of these minerals that are essential for national and economic security. And our ability to support a robust build-out of nuclear technology should also not be understated. We are the second largest producer of uranium in the world, supplying the U.S. with nearly 30% of its uranium imports. Our second call is that Canada can be a primary supplier of critical minerals to NATO. Risks to mineral supply chains are increasing due to foreign price manipulation, export controls, and rising military demands and limited inventories. NATO partners are ill-prepared to respond to global conflicts and are currently beholden to China's market dominance and a powerful ability to exert export controls. Canada's mastery of sustainable mining production and finance, stable governance structure, and understanding of global markets can position it as an important supplier to its NATO allies. As a founding signatory to NATO, we argue that Canada, in cooperation with its private sector, should create a critical mineral reserve for niche metals vital to defense purposes. As Canada is embarking on one of the biggest defense buildups in history, the development of critical minerals should be central to its strategy. While Canada holds promise and potential, much work remains to be done to overcome the challenges it faces to grow its market share. As example, Canada has the third longest lead time in the world for mining projects according to a recent report released by S&P Global Insights. We can and we must do better. We can also overcome our regulatory challenges by creating a new foreign policy that underscores our relentless commitment to grow Canada's market share and deepen its trading relationship with its allies and partners. And we also require a new vision for moving our goods to market. 60% of Canada's GDP is reliant on trade, but investments on a per capita basis in Canada lag those of our peer countries. We require a national trade infrastructure strategy that brings all levels of government and the private sector together so that we can translate our trade ambition into action. But we also need to ensure that our supply chains remain fluid and responsive to the needs of our customers. As example, Canada experienced 62 work stoppages in the transportation sector alone in 2023 and 2024, involving more than 20,000 workers. Again, we can and we must do better, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Goulot. And now we'll go on to Minister Fleming. Minister Fleming, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, committee members and fellow panelists. My name is Peter Fleming, and I'm appearing today on behalf of the Manitoba Métis Federation, National Government of the Red River Métis, as my capacity as Minister of Natural Resources. Since the introduction and passage of the Building Canada Act, the National Government of the Red River Métis has demonstrated its support of the legislation, which comes at a crucial time. The standing up of a major projects office, supported by the knowledge and experience of an Indigenous Advisory Council, are important first steps that build trust in Canada as Canada invests in projects of national interest, but there's still much left to do. As you will be aware, critical minerals are abundant across Western Canada and in our Red River Métis homeland. There's no question that the prairies form a powerhouse of critical minerals and have what the world needs. Key critical minerals such as nickel, copper, platinum, zinc, graphite, and lithium are particularly plentiful in the northern regions of Manitoba and Saskatchewan. It is important to understand that as Section 35 rights holders, Red River Métis inclusion of the development of critical minerals is non-negotiable. From a rights perspective, and equally for environmental stewardship and economic participation. The exploration, extraction, and movement of critical minerals within our Red River Métis homeland requires improved efforts on the part of government and industry regarding our Section 35 constitutionally protected rights, environmental stewardship, and mine rehabilitation, planning, and financing. While critical minerals provide Canada with the opportunity to meet record global demands for these commodities, and the federal government touts its technological know-how and its strong environmental record, it continues to fall short in recognition of Section 35 rights holders and in its ability to maximize economic benefits for the Red River Métis and other Indigenous peoples. With the above said, there are examples of good practices underway. The direct royal agreement our Red River Métis government signed with the Potash and Agri Development Corporation of Manitoba, known as PADCOM, in February of this year is a leading model for how recognition contributes to participation. Based on the Manitoba Métis Federation's relationship with PADCOM, we are now undertaking investment due diligence in a company, its projects, as well as in ancillary activities to support the extraction and movement of potash to tidewater. Potash, a less discussed critical mineral, but one necessary to help feed the world, is in abundance in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. To support the exporting of potash and other critical minerals to global markets, new and expanding trade corridors are required. The expansion and enhancement of the Port of Churchill on the Hudson's Bay as a potential major project of national interest presents the opportunity for shorter, less congested, and less costly shipping routes to allies and customers in Europe and elsewhere. With the push for critical mineral development, there is concern that the focus on economic development will undermine the government's initiatives for Indigenous reconciliation and disrupt the consultation process being conducted in a meaningful way. As stated in the independent auditor's report of the Canadian Critical Mineral Strategy that was published in 2024, the government has just begun to develop a plan for ongoing Indigenous engagement, and the strategy as a whole lacks proper assessment criteria for measuring Indigenous reconciliation, focusing on economic reconciliation through revenue sharing and job opportunities, ignoring important social aspects such as protecting significant cultural sites and improving the overall well-being of communities. Thank you for inviting me to appear on the committee here today, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Minister Fleming. So we're going to go on to our questions and comments. We are going to start with Mrs. Stubbs, then Mr. McKinnon, and Monsieur Simard. 6 minutes each. Madam Stubbs.
Thank you, Chair, and to both of our witnesses here today. Michael, I just want to touch on a point that you've made here and also mention you helped co-contribute, you helped to co-write an article that pointed out in real terms what your words today, the third longest lead time in the world, actually means. It means this, according to you: the collapse in the number and value of projects in Natural Resources Canada's major projects inventory tells a story. At its peak in 2015, it held $711 billion in major projects. By 2023, it had dropped to $572 billion. That's in real dollars. If Canada had retained 2015 levels of planned investment and kept pace with inflation, the figure today would be $886 billion. And shockingly, since this Prime Minister, the current one, has taken office, already $63 billion of investment has fled Canada. That's for all kinds of reasons, but not the least of which we would suggest is anti-development, anti-private sector policies and laws. Do you have some comments on specifically measures or fiscal tools that must be improved in order to bring clarity, certainty, predictability, and fairness to private sector proponents to achieve food, energy, and critical mineral security, as you've rightly argued?
Yeah, thank you for the questions and for the reference to the paper that was written quite some time ago. I'm glad people read these things. Sometimes you never know, but I think generally we're talking about what I referred to in my opening comments around lost market share. That's really what this translates into, and we've got to question the competitiveness of our investment environment in Canada and whether that's stimulating the investment dollars needed to unlock the projects that allow us to have more throughput and output and compete more effectively on the global stage. I think broadly speaking, we've got a time-bound and limited opportunity to really get this right. We have to do a deep dive, which, forgive the term, but from soup to nuts, looks at all of the various measures from tax policy through to regulatory policy, right through to what we're doing on climate, and challenges the competitiveness of our investment environment here in Canada. But looking towards solutions, which is where I think we're at, I don't think there's an argument anymore that our regulatory processes need to be improved. We must do better. I think that's broadly accepted by Canadians, the private sector, and in all levels of government. So the questions are, well, where do we go to? Like, what can we do from here? There's some very practical things I would say need to be in the window for consideration, particularly on the regulatory side. Thresholds under the project designation regulations. I hear from all different sectors of the economy that those thresholds need to be increased so that we can start to effectively move towards a principle of one project, one assessment, but not only that, go further to one decision. And that may sound like a very simplistic thing, but raising the thresholds and moving in this types of direction really does start to identify clear lanes for provincial and federal governments in terms of their jurisdiction, which is the type of clarity that businesses need on the regulatory side. So that's one area that I think is open for analysis and debate for what we can do to start moving projects faster and in tune with the moment. But the more substantive stuff is going to be on a sectoral basis, project by project basis, where we're looking at that full suite of incentives, of tax policies, of everything that's required to unlock dollars, and asking ourselves, where do we stand vis-a-vis our global competitors, and what can we be doing better?
I don't want to put words in your mouth, so would it be fair to say that it is your organization's view that the current layers of regulatory and fiscal policy and uncompetitive taxes and legislation, for example, like C-59, and in case you have any comments on those, go ahead, but that those sorts of legislations, like the Unconstitutional Impact Assessment Act, that to this moment has not been fixed, are those laws and policies barriers to development? Do they deter investment from Canada?
On a net sum basis, there's a lot of complexity and density that I know discourages investment. Our members are obliged to their shareholders to be able to describe where this capital is going to go and how it's going to translate into a return on investment. And so we have done a lot of new regulatory interventions over the last several years that have created that kind of dense landscape that makes it difficult to kind of get to final investment decision. You've probably heard the term pancaking before, and we're working through that now. So our hope is that we're looking at this moment where we really need to unlock different pools of capital in order to invest and become more competitive on the global stage, that will start to unravel a lot of this and cut through and make Canada a successful country.
Mr. Fleming, would you remind everybody of when the court made its decision including Métis and Inuit people in Section 35 rights? Do you have any comments on whether or not the government is actually fully executing its duty to consult with Métis people, and also if you have any comments on whether or not capacity building funding has actually flown, because that's something Conservatives have supported over numerous iterations, but I've been hearing that although the government has promised it, it's not actually getting to local communities.
Minister?
Yes, thank you very much for that question, Shannon. That is quite a big and loaded question. There are many parts to that specific and many avenues that I could go down. I guess probably the best way to answer that question would be, you are correct in the Constitutional Section 35 rights of the First Nations, Métis and Inuit, but often the Métis get forgotten about, and it's more of those dollars flow more to the First Nations, entities that the government is dealing with. So the Métis end up getting lost in a battle between the feds and the provincial government. So to answer your question, I would say there has been some, but not to the extent that there should be. The Métis have not been fully included to the extent that they should be, but they have been included partially.
Thanks. Thank you. We're on now to Mr. McKinnon for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to carry on with Mr. Fleming, or Minister Fleming, and the direction that Mrs. Stubbs was undertaking. So you mentioned the Building Canada Act and the importance of the Indigenous Council to giving advice to the Major Projects Office. Is this the right path to be on? Can we? Should we be doing more of this? And what would you suggest would be the best way to make sure that we have appropriate and meaningful Indigenous participation and advice?
Thank you for your question, Mr. McKinnon. I would love to send you a complete brief on how we could how that could be seen. So if you would allow my staff to send that to you, but I'll just capitalize on some of the issues. We do have to definitely look at the areas of interest and the areas of use. Far too often, legislators, persons in big cities, they look at the vast north and they see just trees. All they see is trees and rock. It's not just trees and rock. It's livelihood for a lot of our citizens, uh, Métis citizens, Red River Métis citizens, First Nation citizens as well. It's livelihood, trap lines, significant sites, and those things do have to be considered when we're going after these critical minerals. So it is key that we have those parameters and those the ability to have a say in where they are and what we would like to see. The Manitoba Métis Federation has made it very clear that we are in support of C5 and to try and streamline and have building Canada and the minerals mined and but we can't forget about the livelihood and our cultural significant areas.
By all means, send us a brief. We have brilliant analysts here who will do their best to weave that into our report. I guess I'm still concerned about making sure that we consult properly and meaningfully. You mentioned that many times the Métis Federation gets forgotten in our conversations with First Nations, for example. How can we make sure that you're not forgotten anymore?
Well, I think it's just a constant reminder to those persons, instead of just maybe putting it out as Indigenous, where even the media outlets, when they see Indigenous, they're automatically thinking First Nations. It doesn't matter which media outlet it is. All too often, when Indigenous is brought up, they only see the one specific group. There has to be, in the documents, that inclusion of Métis, Inuit, along with the First Nations.
Okay. And in terms of facilitating more Indigenous participation, Métis and First Nation and whatnot, are government programs like the Indigenous Loan Guarantee helpful when trying to participate? I note that I believe that fund has been increased from $5 billion to $10 billion. So is that something that you guys are able to access effectively and make use of?
You know what, I'm just waiting. I am not quite familiar on that particular fund in my capacity, but I would like to have that looked into and get back to you on it.
That would be excellent. Thank you very much. You mentioned the importance of the Port of Churchill, and I know that we've been talking about the possibility of enhancing it and expanding it. How would that affect your federation? I should think that might involve also increases to the rail transport in that vicinity and so forth. Is that an opportunity for more jobs and more participation in these areas?
Oh yes, it definitely is, and us as Red River Métis citizens, we are entrepreneurial. We are always looking to have that inclusion of our citizens there. It definitely will be a great asset, I believe, for our citizens. It will be a great asset for the North. The North, as you know, is isolated, but if we can do it properly, then I think it's going to be a great thing for the North.
Okay, so I only got 20 seconds or so left. Can you just give me an estimate of, give me a description of what the territory of the Red River Métis is?
Yeah, so basically we have a homeland of Northwest Ontario into right across into BC, up into kind of right across Alberta, Saskatchewan, and into BC. The actual home line falls also into North Dakota, coming down in and through the states.
Okay.
Thank
Good
you.
place to end, Mr. McKinnon, and thank you, Minister. Monsieur Simard, 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Mr. Zima, 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to check with Mr. Fleming. Is the interpretation working well? Can you hear me, Mr. Fleming? Can you hear the translation coming through into English, Mr. Fleming?
Oui, c'est vrai que je sonne très bien. Merci.
Yes, I know I sound great. Says Mr. Sima. So, Mr. Fleming, I'm going to come back to the comment that you've just made on C5 and perhaps the question of consultations. I'll be quite frank with you. Under C5, we have raised many questions around Indigenous consultation, but I must confess quite humbly that we haven't spoken much about consultation with the Métis. It was mentioned very little. Perhaps we need to put Indigenous and Métis, but I think it's more complicated than that. Now, people have come before the committee and have indicated the importance of having free, prior, informed consent for Indigenous nations. And in the context of Bill C5, I think it can be problematic to ensure that we always have free, prior, and informed consent. And I wonder, is it the same issue for the Métis? And perhaps you could provide information to the committee on the consultation mechanisms that currently exist between the federal government and the Métis when it comes to these big natural resource projects. I'm not sure if I really understand how this works. So could you explain this to the committee? Could you give your comments on the consultation with the Métis and the federal government?
Yes, thank you. You came across perfectly. It is a complex situation, as you have pointed out, and I appreciate that you you were taking note and recognize that sometimes the Métis get left out of the Indigenous discussion just because of the political. I think it's the political climate. I do suppose, but getting to your question with the consultation on these major projects, we do occasionally, when we have consultations on any type of resource or something to that that requires consultations, the government would provide consultation dollars to implement those questions with our citizens. So we would use those capacity dollars to speak with our citizens and form their view. So all of our citizens we would encompass all of our citizens by using those capacity dollars to consult with them, and then we would, through Resolution 8, speak to that in negotiating and communicating with the federal government.
Est-ce que autre élément qu'on a abordé?
Another element that has come up in the committee is as follows, namely the possibility of perhaps having co-development projects together with Indigenous nations and perhaps with Métis nations could be partners in these natural resource development projects and mining projects. I believe it was Mr. McKinnon who put a question to you about funds that have been made available for that. So as far as you know, are there any natural resource projects in co-development between private companies, the government, and the Métis people? Does that type of co-development project exist?
Well, I would just like to just sort of back up and just give you a little, if you'd give me the opportunity to perhaps send you information on our Resolution 8, which talks about the consultation process of government working with the Manitoba Métis Federation. I will have staff follow up on that to sort of give you an idea on how that consultation process works. As I mentioned in my notes, we do have a partnership with Paddock here in Manitoba. That's a potash company. They are experimenting. They're actually using a new type of extraction system. So they had offered a royalty agreement with us. So we're one of the first to partner with them. They're one of the first private companies to partner with us on that type of, and actually it's the first type of agreement with PADCOM. So it is actually a groundbreaking, it's a groundbreaking agreement that we have with PADCOM.
Thank you.
So,
yeah, thank you, Minister. We're on to our second and last round of questioning. Colleagues, I'm going to have to be pretty strict with time if we're going to finish on time, so I'm going to give you a 1-minute warning at the 4-minute mark. So, Monsieur Mallette, 5 minutes.
Mr. Goulot, so you mentioned uranium, that Canada is the second largest producer. Who would be the first? Or would you know?
Our largest uranium producer. I'll have to get back to you.
Okay. So the uranium we produce, you mentioned, I forget the number, but 37%. So there's a percent of our uranium that goes to the United States. What percentage? So we ship a percentage of our production. What percent is that of their requirements? How important are we in that equation with the United States?
We're the #1 supplier of uranium to the U.S.
And would you know who is the second supplier for them?
Well, there's where we started to get into the other foreign actors, your Kazakhstan's and other countries. Yeah.
So we are the safest. And,
we are. We're
more
the
stable.
The largest importer and by far an ally.
And our uranium resources in Canada. Do we? What would be the not the value, but the uranium deposits we have? Do we know how many years, or like we're stable?
Decades. Stable. Yes, we have a very significant supply of uranium.
Okay, thank you. All right. So to you again, this question: the key infrastructure projects like the Northern Road Link and the Wabikwi Supply Road remain stuck in the regulatory system, despite the calls for action to develop the Ring of Fire in Northern Ontario. Do you believe this development failure has held Canada's mining industry back?
I think the problem is more structural, to be honest. We've got very antiquated planning processes when it comes to identifying trade-enabling infrastructure. Calls for a national trade-enabling infrastructure strategy are long overdue. David Emerson flagged this in 2015 when he reviewed the Canada Transportation Act. In 2017, it came forward again through the Barton Commission, and in 2023, all premiers at the Council of the Federation underscored the need for a true trade-enabling infrastructure strategy. And so I think in the absence of having that kind of comprehensive planning process, we are missing out on some of these opportunities where limited taxpayer dollars need to be divested or invested into infrastructure assets that we know are going to produce strong economic returns. And so those aren't conversations that we're having now at a national level, and they're the types of conversations we need to be having in short order.
maybe on the same line, has the current system hurt Canada's economic competitiveness in energy security and critical mineral potential?
In terms of the absence of trade enabling infrastructure and you know, a concrete plan that we have a pipeline of projects that we're investing towards because they benefit the economic interests of Canadians, yes.
Canada now has the second slowest permitting times in the OECD. Has the Liberal government made the permitting process worse by creating more bureaucracy and uncertainty over this last decade instead of results?
Well, we're focused on outcomes now. That's definitely where we need to be. I provided a bit of a window in terms of where reform can occur, so that we are meeting the moment and moving with speed. We've been advocating for a long time that our regulatory approval and permitting processes are too slow in this country. We had warnings about C-69 when it came out about some of the structural challenges that it could create, and Ms. Stubbs had articulated, you know, the net effect of some of the natural resource projects and their inability to come forward. So we're at a point now where we really need to be focusing on reform. We need to be identifying the areas where things can be streamlined. We can't forget about permitting and the need to speed up our ability to permit, in addition to approving our regulatory processes. So,
Thank you very much, Mr. Millette. Ms. Huguet, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nice to see you, Michael. As you know, and for the benefits of the committee, I used to be a member of the Business Council of Canada. Thanks to that participation and my experience of 40 years in business people don't spend too much time talking about the last 10 years. They talk about today and the future, right? Because they've been dealt whatever set, and then they deal with it. You just came back, if I'm not mistaken, from a group meeting of the Business Council. I think it was in Calgary not too long ago. We have a new government. What was the good things about what the government has been doing, and what was some of the things that we could be improving? And if you can frame that, Michael, in the if you allow me to call you Michael, in the sense of critical mineral and the study we're doing right now.
Yeah, look, it was a successful meeting, as you know. Claude, these meetings are well designed, well in advance, and our members take them seriously. At the same time, I have to respect the confidentiality of what is discussed at them. And so I would refer you to the paper that we produced in July, which was intentionally released in advance of the national meeting of energy and mines ministers. And it's really the call to action that we're at a point where there's broad alignment that we're really working through a moment. And if Canada plays its cards right, we can really capitalize on this opportunity and start to grow our market share. And the demand signals are all there. The demand signals are there on the energy side. The demand signals are there on the critical mineral side. We discussed some of them today. And the demand signals are there on the agri-food side, which I know is a conversation for another day. But the policy enablers that we're advocating for, because we are all directionally aligned that we need to move towards a pro-growth economic agenda, those policy enablers are there. We've got one part foreign policy, trade enabling infrastructure we've talked about. There's a need for a concrete innovation agenda to really get underway and start to add more value to the products that we're starting to export. We spent quite a bit of time talking about the regulatory approval and permitting piece already. And so it's really this, whole of government approach is what the business community is looking for, so that we're all moving in the same direction, and that we know that the outcomes we have a better chance of achieving those outcomes that we all want, not only for the near-term crisis that we're working through, but for the generations to come.
Michael, the other trait, or what I've observed, and I think I was like that too, is CEOs like action-driven. They like to boiling the ocean is not exactly in their DNA. If you had the magic wand, because things like reviewing the overall tax policies or, these are big statements, they take a long time, and sometimes we end up boiling the ocean, right? So if you had a magic wand, which is a question I often ask in my career, if you had a magic wand and you wave it the first time, the first wish, and then the second time, the second wish, what would it be from a practical perspective?
Mr. Goulot, you have 1 minute to wave your magic wand.
Capital, 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 capital. And it would be looking at the full suite of financial incentives and tax incentives that are required to unlock an unprecedented level of capital. And we need to do this due diligence where we're benchmarking against our peers who are competing for global market share, who are making it easier for companies to invest in their countries. You know that our DNA is large employers. We've got companies that have the capability of investing in other parts of the world. We need to make that investment destination Canada. That has to be at the top of the list. So if I could wave my magic wand, that's where it would go.
Thank you. Thank you both. Monsieur Simard, 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Before I talk about magic wands, I just want to make sure that you can hear me properly, Mr. Goulot. Can you hear me? Is it coming through?
Il faut sélectionner.
Now you need to select the channel.
Ouais. Est-ce que comme ça vous m'entendez?
Can you hear me now, sir? Can you hear the translation coming through?
C'est branché sur l'autre. Voilà.
I think it's plugged in on the other one.
Merci. Merci. Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Can you hear me now? Is the translation working now? Can you hear me? Yes? Excellent. Thank you. A little bit of a magic wand and it all works magically. No, I'm not going to talk about magic wands, in fact. But I like Claude's question here. Namely, in an acceptable period of time, what can actually be done tangibly? Earlier, you referred to an infrastructure strategy, specifically when it comes to the deployment of critical minerals. I've heard from many project developers that it's a lack of infrastructure that's really putting a brake on their projects, in particular in the north. So could you inform the committee about this, or if you have documentation, if you could provide that, as to what can be done in a reasonable time frame, government action that can be done to help with infrastructure in a reasonable time frame to facilitate the deployment of the critical minerals sector?
I think there's some immediate things that we could get to you so that you can start to understand some models that are out there. Infrastructure Australia has a terrific model where they go through the identification of infrastructure assets. The criteria that they apply is economic weighted heavily, so that the decisions around where to put the tax dollars are really being focused on assets that are going to generate a strong economic return for the citizens. So there's some models there that I would be happy to point you to. One of the observations that I shared in my opening remarks was around this idea of creating a critical mineral reserve for our NATO allies. That can't be done in government isolation. That's a table that can be struck immediately between the private sector and governments in order to look at the commodities that are essential for national security. What are the market mechanisms required to unlock the potential of those, and then have the offtake agreements not only with our own government, but start to explore what's possible with NATO partners. That's something that can be done in short order.
Oui, je voulais d'ailleurs.
Yes, I did want to quickly come back to that. If I've correctly understood you, if with the opportunity of having this critical minerals reserve, that would be a good way of actually further developing this strategic sector. But to do that, we need infrastructure. We need to have infrastructure so we can form this critical minerals reserve. And there's an excellent project on that. in Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. That's how I'd like to round things off, Mr. Goulot. I think we already have the solution in hand.
Mr. Martel, 5 minutes, and Mr. Danko will wrap up with 5 minutes as well.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question for Mr. Goulot. We know that the government does not want to withdraw C-69. They're really digging in their heels on that. So what do you think about Bill C-5, which should actually expedite these major projects? So on C-5, do you really believe in this? Are you a believer in Bill C-5? Do you think it would really expedite these projects?
We do believe in C5. We signaled our strong support for the direction that it's trying to head in. We appeared in front of the Senate to communicate our support for it. We think the early signals are positive. The CEO of the MPMO is a person with exceptional characteristics and qualities, very capable of taking on major assignments. I think her track record is quite strong. Some of the other parts of the machinery that they've built around it in order to ensure that they're working with the Indigenous communities in an appropriate way through the advisory council are very positive. And so, we do have to have faith in the process in our view, because we need something to meet the moment. At the same time, we're not in the business of seeing workarounds. That's why some of the arguments that I put forward in front of you today around where structural reforms could occur in the context of one project, one review, and one assessment really need to be taken into account, because there will be a lot of capital and projects flowing outside of the C5 structure. And that's just as important, and we need to make sure that stands on firm ground.
Do you think that if we don't change the regulations, or if we don't change the permitting process, do you believe that we're actually going to be able to become competitive if we don't actually do anything about some of the regulations or the way in which we get permits? If we don't change anything there, can we be competitive?
Make any changes that would be a serious handicap to our competitive position in the event that we did nothing that wouldn't resonate, I don't think, with the private sector, that wouldn't resonate with what Canadians want. Broad strokes of different political parties are all calling for reform. So we do need to meet this moment in that capacity. We've got ideas to share around where regulatory reform can occur within the construct of the impact assessment itself, without having to go through a process where we're repealing a full piece of legislation and then waiting all of that time to replace it with something which in parallel just discourages investment, or at least puts it on ice or on the sidelines when we're at a moment where we really want to see that capital flow into Canada in the near term.
I'm curious about this. How many departments or different federal agencies generally participate in the review of one single mining project? Do you know how many are involved?
In totality, it would obviously range from project to project, depending on where it is across the country.
And if I proceed in this way, a total number of permits that a mining developer would have to obtain under federal jurisdiction. Could you give us that?
In a report where, there are projects that have to obtain sometimes hundreds of permits.
They still have some time? Now, you've talked about the price manipulation being carried out by other countries. Now, that is quite a cause for concern, because we don't have any control over that, it seems. And if we want to get market share, well, it's often a question of price, and then sometimes the mine isn't profitable. So is there a way in which we can actually control this, or are we at the mercy of this type of price manipulation?
I certainly think it's a major headwind, but in thinking through our proposal around a critical mineral reserve for Canada, there's certainly an identification of a number of tools that are available, ranging from, infrastructure funds, loan guarantees, investment tax incentives, price floors, equity positions, offtake agreements. We have to look at the totality of what's available in order to stand up these projects that are going to harvest the minerals that we need for our national security purposes. So, although there's headwinds, we're very hopeful that a solution can be created.
Merci.
Mr. Danko for 5, wrapping up.
Mr. Chair, and standing between the end of this committee and the craft brewers reception. So a couple questions for Mr.
We are televised, by the way. So,
a couple questions for Mr. Goulot. The Business Council of Canada has your members. You rely on the expertise of your members for data-driven policy in order to strengthen Canada's economy, our social fabric, democratic institutions. And I notice on your publications that there is a very strong emphasis on climate change and clean growth and low carbon energy solutions. So I want to give you this opportunity to maybe expand on why do Canadian businesses and the Business Council put such a strong emphasis on climate change and the environment and those kinds of policies?
First and foremost, we have a great story to tell in terms of the environmental attributes of the vast majority of our natural resources and agricultural products in the country.
But you can't because of C59, right?
When we've done our benchmarking, it has shown that Canadian companies are best in class, and that's something that we're absolutely proud of. At the same time, maintaining that best in class status is going to require a lot of work, and that's where we start to explore, what types of policies do we need in order to kind of maintain that edge. Access to abundant clean electricity, for example, is something that has been a hallmark of investment in Canada. But look at where we're at now. Provinces that once had surpluses are now facing deficits, and so we need to get on with a pro electricity agenda in order to kind of maintain this best in class status. So that's just one area of why we think it's vital for us to stay on top of this. In turn, it attracts investment, and we need a heck of a lot more of it in Canada at the moment.
Thank you. And just tying that back to critical minerals and development, in your opening remarks, you specifically noted green energy as driving demand for critical minerals. That's what we've heard from a number of witnesses. How do you see that from a business perspective as a growth area for Canadians from extraction to processing to finished products?
It's certainly being stress tested right now in a number of different green technology applications, but we have to play the long game on this and realize that critical minerals is really the source of a lot of technologies, advanced technologies, green technologies, defense technologies. So the sooner that we can kind of get a stronghold on more market share, we'll create long-run growth for Canadians, which is a great thing.
Thank you. And final question, I'll just turn it over to Mr. Fleming for maybe the last word today. I'd be interested in hearing the Métis perspective on green energy, environmental policies, regulations, and climate change in terms of critical mineral growth and expansion.
Thank you for the question. So I just want to point out and add that Manitoba has made the commitment for 600 megahertz of wind power electricity. The Red River Métis have been able to acquire 200 megahertz of that part of the market. So that is 51% owned of the company that has to be going after that wind power and bidding on it. The Red River Métis have to own 51% of it. So it is a big commitment by the province in working with the Red River Métis and also the First Nations here within Manitoba. So we do have a lot of good communication with the province. If I was asked about a magic wand, I was hoping that I would get asked about that particular question, but it would be pointed and directed towards Mr. Gold that do your due diligence and consult and do your duty consult and approach the Red River Métis within the areas so that the government isn't having to tell these companies that you have to do it beforehand, which is going to make it a lot easier when you're approaching the government when they start asking those questions.
Thank you, Minister and colleagues. That's all the time we have today with this panel and colleagues. That completes our witness list for this study. And I don't know about you, but I thought the panels today were absolutely excellent. So we thank you for your thoughtful testimony, responses to questions, and as we always say, we welcome a brief from you if you'd like to submit that to the committee. So, folks, our next meeting will be Thursday. We will start the forestry study with the department in the first hour, and then in the second hour, we will do drafting instructions for the critical minerals study. There'll be some travel budgets we have to, or there will be a couple of budgets, study budgets that we have to approve. And colleagues, while we're still gathered, can I just give, on your behalf, a big shout out to our translators, to all the amazing staff that serve us, to the amazing assistants that keep us on the straight and narrow, and we are served well in this Parliament. So thanks everybody, and thanks to all of you. Good questions, strong opinions, and onwards. Meeting's adjourned.